I'm sitting down with Dean McClelland, CEO and founder of TontineTrust. And you're a special guest for us because our CEO and founder, Raul, has very much been interested in having you on. We're exploring the retirement crisis that is impending not just in America, but all across the world. As populations age and pensions are unfunded, people are really trying to figure out how are we gonna solve this problem. And he came across some of your work and was really interested in it. And so obviously, as some of our viewers may have heard, TontineTrust, we're gonna be talking about tontines today. So Dean, thanks for coming. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this almost ancient side of finance?
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me along. I'm honored to be here. I'm a fan of the channel. I have to say, sometimes it scares the heck out of me, the stuff that I'm seeing on the channel. But this is stuff that needs to be said. So, kudos to you guys for being the guys to say it.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that.
In terms of the background, I stuffed that up as a mix. What was the question again?
Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into tontines. There's not really a standard, people go into banking and there's a whole infrastructure for that. You go to the right school and you do the right major and then you become an investment banker, but there's not really any established path for how one finds their way into the world of tontines, or at least not for the last 100 years. So I'd just like to hear a little bit about how you ended up in this line of work.
Okay, well, let's just say I didn't wake up 3 years ago thinking I want to get into the pensions business. I was living in the south of Spain, semi-retired, and I'm having a conversation with my mother, who's also living in Spain. And for some reason, she's kind of off her game that day, and I'm asking her what's wrong, and she tells me that one of the friends in the golf club has just passed away. I said, "Oh, she must have been really close to you. Is that why you're so upset?" And she's like, "Yeah, but not really." She says, "It's more about the fact that she's so tight with her money." I said, "What do you mean by that?" And she's like, "Well, look, you have to understand." She says, in the golf club, we've got all these members aged between 65 and 85. We've all got money. We're down here to enjoy our lives. But the problem is, none of us know how long we're going to live. So we're terrified to spend money. Every day we worry about it. Because if we run out of money, we're going to end up, if our kids don't take care of us, we could end up in the nursing home, back in Ireland or England or something like that, which to them is the equivalent of being sent to prison or something, something
Where
really
in Spain
bad.
Is this?
In Marbella.
Okay.
So, can you put this in context? What's this got to do with the lady? And she said, well, the thing is, we worry about this so much. We're terrified of spending money. We worry about it all the time. And she said, but then something happens where this lady passes away, and she was the most careful of all about spending money. She didn't want to spend a penny, and now she's dead, and all that money's sitting in her bank account. She's nobody to leave it to, and she never got to enjoy her retirement. So she says, we're having all these conversations in the club. We're thinking, you know what? Why are we saving? Why don't we just enjoy our retirement? Why don't we just go ahead and spend the money? And this is what they think about. It's like, okay, wow, that's a bit deeper than I expected. And I start going through it with her, and I said, look, how long have you been thinking this way? And she's like, about 20 years. I was like, whoa, okay. I said, is there anybody else in the golf club that thinks that way? She says, every single one of us. It's all we ever talk about. It's like, holy shit, this is a problem. Someone needs to do something about this. I said, okay, look. I solve problems. Let me go and have a look. And that's, I guess, how I got interested in the topic.
So you have this personal connection to it, but I'm sure your research didn't immediately end up on tontines. What was the first place you kind of dipped your toe in and you started to realize the magnitude of this problem, and that really what's out there isn't going to solve these problems for anybody?
The first thing I looked at was reverse mortgages. The idea that you give your house to someone and they pay you an income for the rest of your life, and then when you pass away, then your house goes to the company. There was just something didn't feel right about it. I didn't think any of them would agree to do it, and at this point I've now promised them that I'm going to find a solution. I didn't think anybody would be comfortable, signing their home over to someone else. It just feels wrong. So obviously the natural next step to look look at was annuities. So I went online and started getting pricing, let me see if I can find some firms. And eventually I did, got a few quotes from the annuities companies, and I was just absolutely shocked by the price, by the value on offer. I just thought, there's no way I can go back to these people and start offering this because, it just doesn't work. So I kind of got stuck at that point. And eventually, in fact, to all her credit, she came and knocked on the door and said, what's going on? Have you found this? Because I've told the people in the golf club my son is on the case. And I just keep looking and looking at it. I start reading about this thing called a tontine. And I'm finding all these academic papers. And all these, highly respected academics around the world have been publishing papers saying, look, there's a retirement crisis in swing. The only way we're going to solve this is to bring back the tontines. And that's how it all started.
Well, if we're going to bring back the Tontines, I think the best place to actually start is to go even further back and look at kind of the evolution of the tontine from its beginnings, how some of the ways that it was used, and actually kind of the death of the tontine. There are some places in the world where they still exist, but in America they were very popular, and now most people have only heard of tontines from episodes of cartoons and dime store mystery novels, so they've kind of fallen out of favor, and there is good reason for that, but it's definitely worth exploring before we jump into how tontines could solve the problem.
We're very much aware of the problem, but the first thing to do is look at what is wrong with the existing solution, because even when I started doing this, all of the firms that I spoke to said, just tell them to buy an annuity. What's wrong with an annuity? But you've had some personal
Yeah, so I actually worked at an insurance company. Right after I graduated, I didn't put enough effort into going and finding a job, and I ended up calling up somebody at my golf club, and he worked at an insurance company. I said, "What do you got? I need something while I figure out what I'm going to do with my life." And I ended up on the annuities desk, helping financial advisors, which the way our company was set up, we were a non-fiduciary, and that meant that all of our advisors were actually working at other companies who we had servicing agreements with. So they were selling our products. Nobody who worked at my company actually sold our products. So these salesmen would call in and they had no idea what they were selling. Not only were some of these benefits not very good or overpriced, but the actual salesmen themselves, the financial advisors, quote unquote, didn't know what they were selling. And then as well, I got to talk to some of the actual annuity holders, and they didn't know how to use these products. They were overly complex, and the company itself ended up actually misforecasting interest rates so poorly that they had to close down the entire annuity business in an effort to get financial advisors to transfer our annuities, which had actually made promises that were too juicy. The benefits were too good. And they figured out through some dealings that they could stop paying commissions to the salesmen if they stopped selling annuities altogether, with the bet that those annuity salesmen would transfer out the products and get them off of our balance sheet. And it worked perfectly, because the salesmen are just interested in getting paid.
Yep.
And the people who own the products don't know how good they have it, if it is any good. If it is any good, they still don't understand it.
Yep.
But there are issues with the fees, and that it doesn't actually, in some cases, it doesn't guarantee income for life. Which is really what's needed in a world where people continue to live longer. You can make a plan today that puts you out into the longevity calculations that we have with modern science, but at the rate at which health and wellness is advancing, you could do a pretty good job for yourself now, and because of a fantastic advance in modern science, still be left out to dry.
Yeah, and this is the problem, and we all face it. And this is what we need to solve. But if you go back to annuities specifically, when I started this journey almost 2.5 years ago, nearly 3 years ago, I was contacted by registered investment advisors out of the US. They said, "Oh, this is brilliant. This is exactly what we want to give to the clients. This is what we want to show to them." Because the annuities that we're having, which are our only option at the moment, we just don't want to do it. And I said, look, do me a favor. Can you send me over some brochures for your best-selling annuities? And they send me over these documents. They're like 60, 70 pages long. Even I couldn't understand them. I'm pretty certain you would struggle to understand this because, they're not there to explain the product. They're there to hide the fees.
It's pretty much just liability. That's why it's 60, 70 pages, is so that it covers every single intricacy so that they can say that they gave the client exactly everything that they needed, knowing full well that client is never going to be able to understand it and make an educated decision based off of the information that's been placed in front of them.
Exactly. If you thought the terms and conditions on Facebook were already complicated, try reading the terms and conditions of an annuity. You need a maths degree to be able to work out what the hell's going on.
So, you figured out that annuities weren't going to solve it. Obviously, a lot of the certain countries, we have the Social Security system here in the U.S. I know you're from Ireland. Countries all over the world have their own forms of a sort of pension to protect people after they retire. But it's pretty obvious here that Social Security is not going to be a viable solution, most likely by the time I reach retirement age. And as well, if you just talk to anybody about the sorts of checks they're getting from Social Security, it's not enough to live on. So that you have to supplement it somehow. So we know that what's available from the government is not enough, and what's available on the private market currently is suboptimal, to be polite. So how did you come to this conclusion that Tontines were a viable alternative?
Well, just if I comment on the Social Security pensions situation first. There was a Citigroup report out, I think it was about 2 years ago now. They calculated that the richest 20 OECD countries in the world have a combined pension deficit of 78 trillion, which is bigger than global GDP. And they forecast that this is going to rise to 400 trillion by 2050. So basically, it's rising faster than GDP. So if you've got a problem that big, that's completely out of control, it's not getting solved anytime soon. So anybody I talk to in Europe that's around, more like your age, I say, how do you feel about the pension system? You have to pay in at the moment. They're like, we'll never see it. We'll never see it. We'll never see a penny. It's like a tax. They've just completely written it off. If you think about the US, obviously, this is where we are at the moment. There's of the 50 states, I think 49 of them are so underfunded that there's a good chance they'll run out of money between the next 7 and 15 years, which is unbelievable. And again, it's an unsolvable problem. There's one state, which is Wisconsin, which is fully funded. And the reason you can trust in getting your pension from Wisconsin is that it's run exactly like a tontine.
So what is some of the differences between the way that it's run in Wisconsin? You say it's run like a tontine, but why don't we get into the nitty-gritty? What does that mean to be run like a tontine?
So if you think about from a pensions perspective, in the good old days, you have defined benefit pension. Yeah. So your uncle works all his life for GE, let's say, once the greatest company in the world, some would say. He contributes every month, and he knows when he reaches retirement, he's going to receive a pension for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, all those calculations that were made by GE originally were wide of the mark. They didn't put enough money aside to be able to make up for that, and now I think you've read all the articles. Ultimately, GE's pension fund is probably going to take it down over the next, certainly less than a decade. And that's like almost 600,000 families that were expecting this payment for the rest of their life. It's now just going to disappear. So what the world has done is they've shifted away from defined benefit pensions because they've realized they're unaffordable for governments or for big corporations. And they've moved to something called defined contribution pensions. And basically a defined contribution pension is that you save into all of your life. And then when you get to retirement, you can now start drawing it out a little bit at a time. So it's great that they get you saving, so you've accumulated some capital, but then you got the problem of working out how much can I spend every month so that I don't run out of money.
There was an example, in our conversations before this interview brought up of one country in particular that has some pretty horrifying statistics about a similar plan where you have to pay in, but you reach that age and it's totally available to you, which is how the defined contribution plans usually work. And Malaysia, where it was 90% of all savers have run through their entire retirement savings within 18 months of reaching retirement age.
Yeah.
So there still has to be, we as human beings are still, at least with our current education system and the way the world works, we're not equipped to actually save for ourselves in this way. And in some ways, there's a little bit of hand-holding that needs to be done. And that's kind of where I think your plan meshes some of the defined contribution aspects, which is that there isn't a set payout for everybody at the end, but knowing full well that you still can't give everybody the keys to the kingdom right when they reach retirement age. So your defined ambition plan. So can we talk a little bit about that?
First of all, if you look at Wisconsin and Netherlands and Denmark, so Netherlands and Denmark are the only A-rated pensions in the world. There's an annual report that comes out every year. And the reason they're so highly rated is that they have the ability to adjust the amount that they're paying. So if there's been a market crash scenario, as there was in 2008 and as is likely to happen in the not too distant future, then the pension fund has the ability to adjust the payments that they've been making going forward. So the amount is not fixed. Yeah. So it's like a safety mechanism that allows them just to balance the books. That's it. It's that simple. Just allowing that feature enables the fund to maintain its solvency all the way along. So when you're saving into the Danish state pension, they'll tell you what they expect you to receive, but it's an ambition. It's not a guarantee because they have that adjustment mechanism that's going to ensure that they're able to keep the promises that they're making.
So they're able to keep their promise. I mean, it seems like a very straightforward methodology. What's preventing the rest of the world from following this model?
Nothing. They're doing it. So Canada has just introduced legislation last year, making I think they call it group life pools or something like that. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but they've offered tax concessions for people when they come together to pool their money. The Royal Mail Pension Fund, which I think is about a $15 billion fund, converted to a scheme like this last year. There was a lot of objections from the insurance industry, understandably, but they were able to convert their whole fund, and there was a 90% approval rating. And now the UK government has come out and said, look, this is actually a great idea. We need to put in place a framework so that everybody can start moving to this type of model, because this is the future.
So I hear the phrase defined ambition and compare it with defined contribution and defined benefits as they exist now, and it seems like a very straightforward swap to be made. A lot of people, when they hear the phrase tontine, their head immediately goes to murder mystery stories.
Yep.
And so I have to wonder, why would you not stick with defined ambition as your plan, and why are we comparing it to tontines?
Okay, so the construction of a collective defined contribution scheme is the term that they use in Europe for the defined ambition scheme. The biggest risk facing that scheme is that you got young guys like yourself putting money in with older guys like myself and maybe Uncle Jim who's reached 65. You now have to trust the trustees and the actuaries not to pay too much to Jim or to me, and to make sure there's enough left for you. Yeah? And this is a big problem. So the reason we're interested in tontines and the reason we want to bring it back is that we want to make it very simple. We want to make it very easy for you to trust in the tontine. And the way we do that is that, if we use the case of your Uncle Jim again, we get 10,000 guys, they've reached retirement age, they put their money into the tontine, and it's only guys of the same age that have put in the same amount of money. We keep the ladies in a separate pool, because they're going to outlive the guys. So, they'd always win. And the idea is that now you've got these members in a dead pool. And, year by year, at age 65, let's say Jim puts in $1 million. The first few years, he's getting $5,500 a month. 5 years later, it's gone up to $6,000 a month because the number of members in the pool has gone from 10,000 maybe down to 9,500. And bit by bit, the number of members in the group is falling, and the payment that's being made every month is going up. And the whole point is that if Jim lives long enough, he lives late into his 90s, he's going to be flying around the latest Tesla because we need to pay all that money out because it belongs to the members.
Could you then just simply draw a line in the sand with Social Security, for instance? If we're taking one, it is a dead pool. My family doesn't get a check when I die for my Social Security benefits, which are left over. It goes back into the fund. So it is in the same way as a dead pool, but it's all grouped together. So could they just draw that line in the sand where we say everybody before this point is grouped together, and now we're going to start slicing you into cohorts, and that would follow this sort of tontine model that you're trying to offer, not only to in reading your work, you're trying to bring some of this to the private market, but then also trying to help governments around the world implement a system similar to this for their own people.
Yeah, well, it's we were talking to the pension folk over at the World Bank last year. And they built this amazing new pension system for Kenya. And they launched it because they said, Kenya needs to get a pension system. The problem was that, I think after 8 years, the number of people participating out of a population of, correct me if I'm wrong, 50 million, was, I think, about 75,000 people were now contributing into the pension system because they just, they didn't really see the value. So that was a defined contribution scheme. And then I explained to them that, look, everything you've done is fantastic. The problem is you haven't offered value. You haven't excited the population. And this is where the tontine comes in. Because the reality is, when you join a tontine, you're taking a bet on you. Yeah, you're betting. You're no longer worried that, I could live 20 years and run out of money and be dependent on the kids or anything like that. You're taking a bet. You're betting that you're going to outlive everybody else. Yeah, and if you do, the payoff is so spectacular. You'll never have to worry about money again. And that mechanism, that behavioral science mechanism, has historically proven to be the fastest way to raise the savings rate in any particular country. Because everybody wants to take that bet.
So if you were to compare that psychological aspect of it to life insurance, where you're essentially taking the opposite bet, you're betting that you are going to die before you're able to accrue enough savings for the people that you care about, that's not a bet that anyone wants to think about. And just a good anecdote surrounding that is I had a boss who at the time was in Omaha, Nebraska. This was before he moved to where I was living at the time. And he had a friend who was a contractor who worked for the police force. Whenever somebody would die, he would go and do the body cleanup. And he would call my insurance agent boss and say, I got a really good story for you that you can use to help scare people into buying life insurance. XYZ, I had to go clean up a body from somebody who fell down the stairs at the family reunion, and his mom and his daughter found him. It was all three generations were there to witness this whole thing. And that's the type of story that it takes to get people to make this bet. And there is arguably a place, I'm not totally disparaging life insurance. There are places and times and prices for life insurance, but when it takes that sort of psychological tool to get people to buy it, it lets you see how hard it is for people to make that bet on themselves. But it is actually very easy to make the bet that you are going to outlive everybody. Everybody wants to think that way. And even some of the sales mechanisms that tontines have been used for structuring in the past kind of demonstrate this, where you're trying to raise money for a project, and the idea that one lucky person in that group could end up becoming the sole owner of whatever project it is that you're trying to build can really encourage a lot of people to maybe buy something that if they were just going to be a part owner and it was guaranteed that they were only going to be a part owner, and they might buy that. And historically, the New York Stock Exchange and the coffee house on Wall Street is a great example of that. I look back and they sold shares initially at $200 200 pounds. And they really could have just sold shares in a mutually owned coffee house. But why did they choose this tontine structure? And it has to do with that psychological effect of, I'm more willing to place that $200 bet if I outlive everybody, then my $200 becomes all these other things, and I don't have to buy anybody out or anything like that. It's just really luck.
Yeah.
And then as well in the UK, there was the bridge in London. You actually brought this one up. I'll kick that one back to you.
Yeah. So in a lovely corner of London where I used to live, there's called Richmond, and they have this wonderful old bridge, which was needed. It's been there for a few centuries, but it was needed. Way prior to that, and they couldn't raise the money to do it. And someone came up with the idea, well, let's just run a tontine. And immediately they were able to raise the money. They had a whole lot of people club in. And every year the bridge collected tolls for people that crossed it, and they paid it out to the members, but only as long as you lived. So the longer you lived, the bigger a share you got from the bridge.
And eventually one lucky person owned that bridge. I'm sure, does the family still own the bridge these many hundred years later?
There's no tolls, I can tell you there's no tolls anymore. There's probably a speeding camera, which I've contributed to, but that's a different story.
So those anecdotes can help explain the psychological effect in the way that it can help increase the savings rate, which is a huge problem in itself, and that we're not saving enough. So there's a psychological aspect of the tontines, but while we're going back into the past, I think we should continue to stay there and look at how tontines fell out of favor. Because it is really important to help dispel some of the myths surrounding them. And then it also will lead us into the technological advances that you are kind of building into your product, which help deal with some of those problems. So, back in the 19th century, tontines were the leading insurance and annuity products sold in America.
Yeah, but let's go back further than that.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll let you start.
So I think it was 1653. The King of France has decided he wants to declare war on England. Yeah. Now, what governments have been doing, or even as far back since the Roman army, is that they'll raise money by offering an annuity. Yeah. But the King of France is trying to sell his annuity, and nobody's interested to buy. So this Italian banker called De Tonti comes in and says, "Hang on, I have an idea." He said, instead of paying these people 7% per year for the rest of their life, let's make it more interesting. We sell it to 1,000 people. Every year they'll come along, they'll get their 7% dividend. But if only 999 turn up, then they get slightly more. And obviously what happens is that bit by bit, less people turn up every year because they're passing away. And the yield goes through the roof until, they're getting 25, 50% yields or something later on. When it was launched, it kind of sold out overnight. And immediately France declares war on England. England is now stuck. Where are we going to get the money to fight the French? And they were trying to sell an annuity. It wasn't working. And somebody said, well, why don't you just offer a tontine? And after that, for the next 100 years, all of the European governments, whenever they needed to raise money quickly, they always issued a tontine.
It's pretty incredible, the different ways that it can be used to... And again, it speaks to that. It is a psychological way to get people to invest in things that arguably were good investments prior, but there is something in us, in humans, that we're not totally rational, and sometimes we need that push. And this is just a structure that has historically proven gets us to that point.
Yeah, if you go back and read Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, he's this book is a manual for governments of how to run the countries and how to finance themselves. And he said, look, if a government ever wants to raise money, they'll raise more money and faster by selling a tontine than by an annuity. And then he went on to explain it. And he said, look, as sure as, people buy lottery tickets because we naturally overestimate our chances of winning, he said everybody wants to join a tontine because it's a bet they want to take. It's a bet on themselves that they want to take.
It's ironic, too, because now a lot of states are using lotteries to fund their underfunded pensions. So they even realize that it's these irrational bets on themselves that they're willing to make that are actually the thing that could save these plans which are not working. So But yeah, it is pretty incredible the way that can work, and it played out for the next couple hundred years. Tontines thrived, and even into the U.S.
Yeah. So what happened in Europe was that at this point, the Bank of England comes up with bonds. Bonds. Well, the Central Bank of England hadn't existed, so they created that, and they learned how to issue bonds, and then they worked out actually, issuing bonds is much cheaper than the government issuing tontines. So that was what brought the end to the tontine era in Europe. And at some point, I think it was about 150 years ago, Henry Hyde, the owner of Equitable Life in the US, he was struggling to compete with the other insurance companies. And he started perhaps reading Wealth of Nations or whatever. He learned about tontines, and he decided to launch a tontine pension product in the US. Immediately, the product was copied by, I think, all the other major firms, and it became the absolute blockbuster pension product, so much so that I think they increased the household savings rate from low single digits up to over 50% of households were now investing in tontine pensions. And the tontines themselves were holding over, I think it was 7.5% of US national wealth in a single generation.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. And then, but though, they did fall out of favor, and a lot of people, they cling to these exciting stories, and they think it's because it was all about murder, and it's such a great way to get yourself killed. And my argument to that would be, we sell life insurance. You're more likely to get killed by someone you know.
Yeah.
And you only have to kill one person to steal the life insurance, but we
yeah.
still sell life insurance, and it doesn't make sense to a group of 1,000 people. You're really going to bump them all off to get the tontine, so it doesn't really make sense. And if you look into it a little further, it was actually the insurance companies themselves that kind of got too greedy with the tontines and started putting these clauses in where they were taking advantage of people, purposefully losing checks. So the clause would say the check doesn't show up, we can't, the clause says we absorb all of that. Either sometimes it goes into the tontine and it's paid out to other members, which makes the yield go higher and makes sales easier, and then they can make money on the fees, or in some cases it just went directly back into the insurance company as profit. So either way, the person who has been paying in is getting screwed over, and the insurance company is benefiting.
Yep.
And the government stepped in and said these sorts of practices are not going to be allowed anymore. And sure enough, the insurance companies, instead of becoming more fair and honest with their customers, started selling annuities.
Yeah.
And so in 1906, they put out these laws saying you can't do this stuff anymore with tontines, and sure enough, that kind of marks the death of tontines in America.
Yeah, I've actually seen a few tontine companies. There's quite a few that continued on afterwards, but not nearly as high profile. And certainly, from what I can tell, there's about 2,000 tontines operational in the US at the moment in the form of retirement villages, where the idea is that you join a retirement village. The ones I've seen are mostly in Florida. You buy a home. You survive there as long as you can. And if you run out of money, the community kind of takes care of you until you do eventually pass away, at which point your property is resold to someone else. That sounds pretty much like a tontine.
Yeah.
To me.
One of those problems that we mentioned was the payment can come in and it can get lost, or it can get legitimately lost. I'm not saying that all cases of this sort of problem happening were all bad action by the insurance companies.
Well, it wasn't just the payments getting lost. Yeah. If you read through the Armstrong the report of the Armstrong Commission, there was a number of obscene practices. So first of all, if your payment goes missing or you miss a payment, your pension is cancelled. The assets of the pensions were being invested in all sorts of personal projects connected to the directors of the insurance companies. There was incidences where relatives of the directors of the insurance company were suddenly appearing as if they'd been in there for 20 years, receiving these big payouts, and there was no way to explain it. And all the while, they'd shown in the report that there was accounts where the insurance companies had these side accounts that they were using to bribe judges to keep all the court cases from going to trial. And it was only in 1905 that eventually the dam broke, and then everybody found out about what was going on, and the insurance regulator stepped in correctly and, said this can't continue.
And that kind of brings us forward now in time to what you're doing, and your Tontine is not as simple as just a list of names and the amount of payments they've made in the time. You've taken some of these technological advances that we've seen over the last century, really, and applied them to your product to create a modern Tontine. And it does have a lot of similar facets to the Tontines previously, but a lot of those problems and the practices can be solved by your use of blockchain distributed ledger technology, and as well another problem with Tontines, and it's a problem here in America with Social Security, is death verification. The idea that there are people here who their families won't report them dead because they want that Social Security check to keep on coming in. So there really are a lot of problems with, but it's not just related to Tontines, but it's related to pensions in general, but you've sort of applied some of these fixes to your product. So I'd love to hear about how you're using technology to build this modern Tontine.
Well, when I when I got into this, I started contacting all the global experts on Tontines and talking to them about what are the problems, why hasn't anybody done this so far? And, bit by bit, you get a feeling for what's needed to really bring this back. And one of the biggest things is trust, because, the insurance companies messed this up badly last time. And if you're going to bring it back, you need to make sure the trust is 1,000% in the product. And for this basis, I've been familiar with Bitcoin and blockchain since 2011, but I'd never found a use case. Suddenly the penny drops. Hang on. So we're going to create a system where every penny you put into the system can be tracked on public ledgers. Every investment we make can be seen on public ledgers. And every payout that's ever made can be shown. But you have to keep all the members anonymous to each other so that nobody's going to be worried about anyone going around killing each other. That's like perfect use case for blockchain. Distributed ledgers. We try not to use the B word at the moment. And then the next thing we saw, which a few people have been already trying to work out, was how do we verify that the members are alive? This didn't seem too difficult to me, but we're now patent pending in 150 countries for thinking of it, which is that every month, we'll send Uncle Jim a notice. Jim, we haven't seen your wonderful smile in almost 4 weeks, and you've got a payment coming up. Please, can you log in? Show us that you have control of your device. And in the course of doing this, we know he's got control of the account, but also we're verifying that Jim's alive, because we know we're not looking at a YouTube video of Uncle Jim. We can tell it's him that's there at the moment, and that's the proof of life. And that's done in 10 seconds, and the payment is in his account, his bank account, within 3 or 4 seconds later.
Yeah, that's a fascinating, technological advance that actually does solve that problem of death verification. But I want to ask you, how big of a market do you think there is for Tontines? And specifically, why don't we just start with the U.S. before we go all across the globe?
Well, if we think at the very highest level on a global scale at the moment, there's 1 billion people on the planet already aged over 60, and I think within 20 or 30 years, that's 2 billion. 80% of the money in the world belongs to this group, because millennials have no money. And this is why it's such an important problem to be tackled. If you look at it in the US specifically, the statistic I read is that the baby boomers retiring in the next 5 years have $32 trillion saved for retirement. And if you look at all the studies and say, what is your main thing? Once you hit retirement, what is your main fear? The number one fear is, I'll live so long, I'll run out of money. The second fear is that I'll end up needing long-term care that has to be paid every month. And if I run out of money, I get kicked out on my butt. So which is, two faces of the same problem. So this is the problem that this whole generation faces now. And the only product they have on offer at the moment is an annuity, which is variously known as the most hated financial product in the world for behavioral science reasons. Maybe it's worthwhile explaining the problem with annuities. The industry always talks about, what do they call it? The annuities puzzle. Why don't people buy more annuities? Why didn't people just ring up and buy annuities? Well, first of all, they're very expensive. The research shows that if you put $1 million in an annuity tomorrow, the product they give you is worth about 700,000. That is it, because that's the profit margin of the insurance company. In the good old days, insurers, it was a mutual thing. They came together. They came together in Lloyd's coffee shop in London, to cover each other's risks. It's not like that anymore. Insurance companies now are big corporations, and they're there to serve the stockholders. So if they're selling you an annuity, if they're willing to offer it to you, it's because they think they can make a big margin on it. And that's just the nature of the beast. And the problem is, they'll get, Uncle Jim again, they'll get him to hand over his money. They'll offer him a lifetime income, but it's not index linked. He can get an index linked annuity if he wants.
Which are, those are kind of exploding on the market right now. That was actually one of the techniques that we had to get these variable annuities off of our books, was we offered them a fixed annuity. That was the first line to try and get the annuities off of our books with the benefits that were too juicy, is we offered them a conversion, a nice conversion where we give you these benefits, but we knew the entire time that the product that we were offering them was subpar, even compared to what they had at the time. So they are coming around a lot, but they still don't solve the problems that you're trying to address.
The problem with the fixed annuity, is that it certainly offers a much lower yield than a tontine, because a tontine, there's no 30% capital loss up front. So your income starts off, I think it's almost 42% higher, is the way the maths works out. But if you want index linked, it goes even further. But let's focus on the fixed annuity for now. So what we're saying is that, you put your lifelong savings, you've worked all of your life for this amount of money, you're going to hand it over now, and we're going to give you a fixed payment for the rest of your life, and it's guaranteed by XYZ. Now, the problem with this is that, first of all, it's probably not that attractive a number in the first place. And bit by bit, as you notice, the price of milk has gone up, the price of this, the price of that has gone up. You start realizing, oh my God, my lifestyle's getting worse. I've got a question for you.
Okay.
What is the definition of happiness? I heard a definition a few years ago, which I absolutely love. It was a Google executive explaining it. And he said the definition of happiness is an expectation of positive change in the future. I thought, what about this? This is very fascinating. Think about a billionaire, He's worth $1 billion now. If we tell him in 2 years' time, you're only going to be worth 500 million, he's not happy. He should be happy. He's still got $500 million. But he's not happy because things are getting worse. You take a homeless guy in the street that has nothing, and you say, okay, in 6 months' time, you're going to be living here. 12 months' time, you're going to have a job. In 2 years' time, maybe you're going to have a family. He sees that life is getting better. Now he's happy. So it's an amazing definition. Now go back to the annuities. I'm giving, Uncle Jim $4,000 a month for the rest of his life, and then he starts to realize inflation is kicking in. So he's given up all his savings in return for this payment that's actually going down. So his lifestyle is only ever going to get worse from here. Now go back to the tontine. He puts his money in a tontine. First of all, he starts off with a much better payment to begin with, but year by year, the money's going up. And most likely, it's going up a lot faster than inflation. So all that he can see is that his life is going to get better. So he's now got this incentive to take care of his health. He's not going to be smoking, going to eat better, he's going to exercise more, because he has something to look forward to. Is that if he's one of the winners of the tontine, then he's going to be flying around the latest Tesla by the time he reaches 100.
Well, I'm sure some of our subscribers would probably disagree with you on the Tesla remark, but But that's not why you're here. You're not here to analyze Tesla, so we'll let that one slide.
If it's still around.
If it's still around. That's a good
Okay.
caveat to throw in there for all of the Tesla Q viewers in the audience, which we know we have a few. But so the psychological aspect of it with the Tontines is really, to me, the way that it increases the savings rate is probably the most fascinating and interesting part of it. We kind of brought up Malaysia, but we didn't go into any sort of true case studies with numbers about how it could fix the problem. A good case study would really wrap it up. So if there's any particular country that you want to talk about how this could be implemented, or if in particular on a company level, so if you want to look at like a private example of a tontine and how it could shore up a company that has an underfunded pension, whatever it may be, I think both of those would work as a good way to tie it all together.
Okay, so if you take a look at a Malaysia, yeah, which we touched on earlier on, it's a good case study. They've an amazing pension scheme, 200 billion saved by Malaysians over the last, I think it's about 25 or 30 years. But when they reach retirement age, the money gets paid out, and what they've found is that over 90% of the people, they've never had this much money in their lives. Maybe they've got friends and family coming around, all expecting a little share of it. But ultimately what happens is that 90% of those people spend all the money within 18 months. So that's their pension. That's meant to last them a lifetime. So we're talking to countries like this. Actually, there's several governments that we're talking to at the moment. I won't go into details. Where we're saying, look, here's what we can do instead. Malaysia specifically is the most obese country in Asia. Yeah, so people are not taking good care of their health. Probably they're not incentivized to do so, because actually if they live a very long time, they're definitely going to run out of money. So, they're not actually incentivized to take care of their health in the first place. But if we now take that 1 or 2 billion that's been handed out every year and turn it into a lifetime income stream that rewards you for taking care of your health, you now have the effect that you've got all these Malaysians that have got a monthly income that incentivizes them to take better care of their health. That reduces the burden on the healthcare system in Malaysia. But there's another thing. There was a study done a few years ago where they found that it was a Princeton study, when people are running out of money, when they're worried about making it through, it has psychological effects such that even their IQ is lowered by 13 basis points or 13 points. So effectively, if you can get the whole population to start thinking about moving to lifetime income, you've now improved their health outcomes. It's been proven that if people have a constant income, that you lower the crime rate. And also, you've now got these people that are more comfortable within themselves. They're thinking smarter. They're now able to contribute more to society. And this is why things like this are important.
Well, it sounds like Tontines potentially could be solving some of the other issues with society, as well as helping to fix this retirement crisis, which I think at this point everybody agrees is going to come. So, Dean, I just want to say thank you so much for coming in today, and I think our viewers are going to be excited to hear about Tontines and what you guys are doing to try and change the way we save for retirement.
Yeah, absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Cheers, Mike.